Good viewer, you are watching Xirtus. This is because Xirtus makes you feel good, makes you feel fulfilled. You are enjoying this. You will continue to watch Xirtus for a long time to come. You want to subscribe to Xirtus, and you will. You will like and subscribe and share. You will tell your friends. Tell your friends about Xirtus. Your friends will come to like Xirtus, much as you are liking this right now, as we speak. Thank you for subscribing to Xirtus. See, that was easy.
This next story has been suppressed by mainstream media. Let's go to Andreas for more.
Everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hello. Welcome to the Xirtus. Tune in for another exciting episode of wonder, imagination, and discovery.
Recent Tartarians.
Ментально образует всеобщие закономерности, определяющие законы классической физики. Для нашего
Sometimes I
мира.
look at the moon and just think, your skin's beautiful. Baby, when I met you, there was peace unknown.
Что касается энергии наномер, то она превышает ядерную в немыслимое число раз. 10 в 74 степени.
That's it. That's it. That's it. With your arms now. That's it. That's it.
Thank you for watching Xirtus. Keep listening. Remember, if you enjoyed the video, please follow and subscribe and share and support. It really helps. Coming up next, Xirtus.
By the way, that's gone. If you didn't record that, that's gone forever. It's gone.
Well, I don't know if I misunderstood, because I think at one point Ben wanted me on his show. But since we're swapcasting, I kind of hijacked it because there's so many questions I needed to ask Ben. Ben's been doing such crazy research. For those of you who are, catching up, it's been a few years of Ben just doing nonstop amazing research. His channel's at 13K. Like, if you're on my channel, make sure you are also watching the Archivist channel. You can check it out. Like, he actually posted in the chat. Let me pull this up. If you guys click on this, make sure you're subscribed, double subscribe, make sure you're following the Ben. He's putting all kinds of crazy information on the internet, and as we've been talking for years about like fake news and the real history, he's been going through all the news more and more, deeper and deeper than ever before. How you doing, Ben? How you doing, the Archivist?
Great. What an intro. Holy, I feel like I took a substance and didn't know it.
I just try to put people in the mood, There's like some people, they just click this and then all of a sudden Isaac Hayes starts to play. Me, a little bit more AI, but it does remind me of like how narrative works, because a lot of what you're going through all this newspaper from the 1800s, 19th century, looking at what they're believing and what the context is of their. It's very anthropological what you're doing, right?
Yeah, and for those who don't know, me and you have been friends for almost 6 years,
dude,
and even longer than that now.
Since the beginning of when I've been YouTubing. Yeah, I don't know how long it's been. It's like, I want to say 10, but like we'll just start saying 10. How about that?
Long time. And before I ever posted even anything really, I've had my Twitter now for like 12 years, and I can't remember exactly. Yeah, I think it's kind of a similar story to you and Mike, and how we all just kind of met each other in this weird 1 month time frame, and Victor and everything. And
word, happy birthday, belated birthday to Victor. It was his birthday like a couple weeks ago.
Oh yeah, I miss Victor. But yeah, it was this weird time frame, I think, for everybody. You guys were in Spain, and I had already been watching some of your videos and was aware of Victor, and me and Victor had been talking on Minds. And then through that, I got into Discord with you and everybody, really. Some of our still good friends. And that was kind of where, I had been following, man, what was it called? There was an old forum, Stolen History.
All right.
And I had made some friends on there. And there was kind of this crossbreeding between Stolen History and our Discord. And anyways, long story short, it led to being more vocal about like things that I had been reading over the years. And naturally, you had a very interesting way of conveying thoughts about, kind of unveiling our subconscious and how that relates to history in a way. And your videography I loved, and it was just very different. And like your first, not to say anything against your new videos, but like, your first year of videos for me was my favorite, and they were just so different, and the information was unlike anything out there. And yeah, there's just a lot of overlap. And for people that haven't seen our talk about baby farms, right? And now that's become quite a big,
huge,
powerful subject now. That was something we were talking about, a long time ago, and yeah, segues into many, many moons later, and here we are talking about, similar subject matter, but I think both of our, ideas have evolved quite a lot.
I tried to make a couple Cabbage Patch Baby clockwork pictures earlier too, just because I was thinking about like, yeah, how much this has evolved and how much we've seen this concept.
I like that one a lot.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we've covered the gamut, and just the idea of time and consciousness, and yeah, kind of the subject matter that brings us together today, talking about Eden.
Yeah.
And not just a physical Eden in space, but a subconscious Eden in the mind, and how some of my favorite authors sculpted the way I look at not only reality today, but kind of biblical, Genesis, so to say, right? Adam and Eve type stuff, and how these stories can be more than just a physical representation, that so many, hardcore fundamentalist Christian and religious types cling to these stories, but that there is an inkling of not only truth, but there's more to it. That Jesus always spoke in parables, right? And he always, I would say, overemphasized the importance of the parable and speaking, and not necessarily, I don't want to say rhyme, because that's not what I'm trying to say, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, right? Make it symmetrical to reality without using this current, so that this current thing never gets displaced.
Yeah, and it's like immune to time and to society, right? And it really is like the subconscious idea of speech and language and humans and our existence. When you read like scripture on a very like suggestive, symbolical level, it holds really strong for me. I mean, I obviously everybody feels differently about scripture, but I think me and you have connected quite a lot on that subject. And for those who don't know, my wife is Mormon, and my mom was a Baptist, and my father was Christian, but I was never forced into any particular belief. I was completely led astray, and that was quite lonesome, so to say, from a religious standpoint or a spiritual standpoint as a child. But I'm grateful now as an adult. It led me to finding my own way, so to say. And yeah, rambling, but yeah.
No, but like, it's interesting because so many people would think, a lot of the time you think religion leads to some of these ideas, but it's weird. A lot of it is that religion used to lead to like math, science, and truth searching, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there were people that discovered these truths, but so much of organized societal religion today is suppressing the weirdest possible things. So you're not likely to hear about Eden as much today in church. You're talking more about how you can live your life in the world around you and be a good person and all that, which is great. But I don't think they're talking so much about some of this history and archaeology and trying to show, because it's so many people think it's all based upon like having suspension of disbelief, which is not really at all what it has to do with. Like you can look deeper and deeper into the context, see what people believed and what it's about. And we have more and more data to look at, are they talking about something that's true? Because just because someone's talking about something in a newspaper doesn't mean that it happened. Obviously, we've had that happen a lot. But we've also had a lot of circumstances where the more they try to hide what's happened, you can start to see the outline of what's going on, right? So, I mean, yeah, without being told what to think, you're just seeing this outline eventually. You're like, hey, this is a pretty weird outline. And it's even more interesting that no one's pre-suggested to you. Like, I don't know any religion that's talked about baby machines. Like, I don't know. It's not like a huge part of any religion I know about. So, yeah, it's something that kind of has emerged, but as you look at it, you're like, this all ties in very well into all. This is the simplest solution to a lot of these things.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to get weird, and I know you're not either. But the more I, read papers, again, why I was mentioning so much that the lens that it holds up to time, right? Whatever you feel about scripture, or, the Torah or the Quran or the Bible or, Buddha's teachings, whatever it is, the fundamental part of it, like from a symbolic standpoint, is almost universal. The details is where people get lost. Everybody gets lost in the details and the translations, and which is natural, right? The confusions of tongue. You just think of the Babel story when you look at people arguing over the details, and not, it's never about all the similarities that we share. Doesn't matter what your religion is. You're going to have so many more similarities than you are differences. But it's always about the differences, right? Those are always what push society apart and people and whatever. But yeah, my upbringing was quite the opposite. Instead of it being a pushing and pulling effort, it was like a stagnant, still water. But yeah, anyways, I had a near-death experience I've talked about a lot. And, for a person who's never touched psychedelics, and I have nothing against them at all. I had a strong enough experience that I'm satisfied that there's nothing in the psychedelic world for me. Now, I'm sure people will disagree with that, and that's okay. But I had enough of an experience that I realized, the adjoining world concept. And it kickstarted the obsessive reading. And but yeah, without getting too far off subject, that was kind of a background flashback for not only our history, but a bit of my own from a kind of religious standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, Eden has both religious connotations and also archaeological connotations. This idea, does humanity come from a single place? It kind of makes sense, right? That something would spread out from a single place. I mean,
100%.
So it becomes more pragmatic than just spiritual. But then at a certain point, we have to think about how memory works, how DNA works, how interesting it is that this exists. So there is something kind of, we talk about the zeitgeist, like the spirit of the times. So there is kind of a spirit to humanity, and this idea that this thing has been going on, even if some people die, even if everyone dies, the whole thing is still immortal in a sense. Like this is the same human superorganism that's been going on, unless it's been stopped.
The mushroom, symbolism is so powerful for me when you look at it from that standpoint you just said there, right?
Right.
That our ideas of what is living and what is dead are just really quite wrong. And I hate to say, I'm not like grouping everybody together because I'm sure a lot of people feel quite differently about the subject, but you get what I'm saying. The zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stefan. It was kind of the opposite. what it is nowadays, especially from a religious standpoint. Now, obviously, there are different representations of this. Buddhism is one that stands out to me the most. There are ideas of death and what death was. I think are the most relevant to me now, especially after my experience that I had. I have absolutely no fear of it, whereas it was just such a kind of unknown that without that experience, I think I may have still kind of had that repressed idea or fear of opening that door, which is all death is to me. It's just opening another door. But yeah, religion seems to be kind of an idea of paying penance and, giving the man your money on the boat across the river. And weighing your heart against the feather. And although there are some relevance to all of those stories, I think that really just comes down to what you're doing. The idea of inner work. And I think to everybody that's different.
I hate to do this, but Travis McClung did the Box Saga thing. Where we have this rule now that if someone says Box Saga, we have to play Box Saga for a second here.
Witnessed it the other day on your stream.
Do you know what Box? Yeah, it's like a rule now. Do you know what Box Saga is?
Well, I mean, I know of the Box Saga itself, actual saga. I don't know of this band or song.
No. This is an AI generated song just made about that book that you know about for the purpose of that. I feel like Box Saga actually ties into what you're saying in a sense. Actually, this idea that religion.
Oh, this is AI generated. That's great. I had no idea.
Yeah,
I love the Box Saga. And one of our mutual friends, Longo.
Yeah.
It's something that I don't talk about a lot, but with him, especially since I met him, it's definitely been on the forefront of my mind. And you've seen some of my Etruscan stuff, and we mentioned off air kind of the Aztec, the similarities between these creation myths that exist not only in the Yucatan but in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing we could bring up. The Aztecs, this is from a newspaper article from 1819. What is this from? 1890s or 19?
I think it says it if you go back. It'll say it in my clip.
1919, so during like the flu year. Okay, so Aztecs were crossbreeds of Indians and Etruscans, declares Professor Porta, right? And so I feel like there's probably a better demonym to say maybe than crossbreed, but that is what in history they decided to say. And it is what they're trying to say is more to the point of Etruscans, and when they're saying Indians, I think what they're at that time Indo-Asian, it includes a lot of people in the Indo-Asians.
A lot of people. I mean, they even said
Scythians,
Aryan.
right?
Yeah.
Scythians and Aryans, right? So that's really fascinating because if you start to look at some of the haplotypes, I mean, today that's kind of what we're finding as Scythian haplotypes in North America. So, but this is from 1919, and so he's saying Etruscan. And Etruscan is interesting because when we think of Etruscan, we're thinking of the indigenous people of where Italy and Rome is today, but also Slavic people all around Macedonia and that entire region, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Turia was, it was quite. It's really been hidden as much as the idea of what a Mayan was, right? And Etruscan. Versus what a Mayan, these racial, so to say, labels have changed dramatically, and they, like you mentioned, Scythian, Slavic, they covered the gamut, and it kind of harkens to the Atlantean idea, and that we were dealing with a culture that didn't identify themselves at all by skin color. In fact, when you look in old writings about what an Aryan was, it had nothing. You could find it was like the Egyptian explanation of
a
what
lot of these titles are about like so an Arab or a rabbi or something has to be literate, right? A Phoenician, someone who can write in the phonemes. Right. So culturally, you're culturally part of the culture.
Yeah, and since you mentioned the Box Saga, Etruscan lore myth is identical with Finnish lore. And you find Wotan and Jodin and Odin and Wotan and all of these things
right
on just about every continent. And
which seemed to also be connected to the Indo-Aryan, like Shiva and Odin and it's
the
pretty
Scythian connection is really important. They're much like the idea of a Tartar. What a Tartarian or a Tartar was has lost a lot of its meaning, or at least been misrepresented. And I think that you can say that about just about anyone pre mid 1800s. That's like the sweet spot for me, and the newspapers strongly support that. Yeah, there's something happened in our cultural timeline or historical timeline, and everything like resets, so to
Right.
say, at least from the American narrative.
Well, it seems
What
like
America
even
was.
from the Turkish narrative, right? Like, and that was kind of interesting too. You brought up showing this map in the 1880s. Jerusalem was in Turkey, the holy city, and the Greek and the holy city to the Greeks and the Russians. Thus, the following posts from a pre-location change are even more interesting, right? And kind of showing.
Well, and we've talked about this in the past, but one of your guests, who's one of my favorite parts of your series.
Why is it happening? Keep talking while I figure out how to turn this off. I don't know what's going on, but my screen is like making noises. Just you talk for a while I fix this.
Yeah. Yeah, I got disconnected. That was strange. Oh, let's hope this is still working for me here. Hold on one second. Okay. Okay. Where were we? Yeah, we were talking about Turkey and Constantinople, the symbolism of Constantinople, and that map you showed. It was called the center. It was called Eden. It was called Jerusalem. Yeah, many things, and just this idea that the Eden, as we know it, at least from a physical standpoint, has shifted places, or at least been identified by many different places around the realm. And what I love so much about that picture you showed was it reminded me when I was listening to one of your episodes, and your guest was talking about the history of Constantinople and that perhaps that was the original place of Christ's crucifixion. It reminded me of some of my early newspaper dives into Constantinople and what they were finding, because Constantinople came online in a similar way to America, early 1800s. You find a lot of pictures of Turkey where it's desolate, and they're just kind of cleaning the dirt out of the streets. And like I do when something pops into my mind and I'm thinking like, okay, what was this really like in this time frame? I just resort to the newspapers like I've done with a million different subjects. And it was crazy. Even still until the 1840s, 1850s, 60s, 70s, they were calling Constantinople Jerusalem. And it just like, it blew me away. And although, I've seen Jerusalem on several maps in different places from, you've actually been there, right? What's the city I'm thinking of in Peru?
Belén? Are you talking about Belén or in Iquitos? Or
no, the main one. The main city there.
Oh, Lima.
Is it Lima?
Lima, Peru.
I feel like I'm going to get it wrong, but Peru, there was old maps of Peru that had it labeled as Jerusalem.
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of Jews that came to Peru also, and so when you go to like the middle of the rubber Amazon, you'll see, old Jewish pharmacies and all of these things from the 1800s that look like you're in, the building quality looks like you're in like Indiana, like it's out of concrete though, but it has like French kind of, windows and everything. But you're in a swamp or like in certain parts of the rainforest are really muggy and humid and everything. So it sticks out as kind of bizarre juxtaposition.
Cusco.
Oh, Cusco. Okay.
Yeah.
Cusco as
you can definitely you should be able to Google that and you find some old pictures. Me and Victor went over them. One of our shows, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, you can find all kinds of lost tribe descriptions of Cusco.
And like the same mapping style. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, like it does have the same mapping structure style, like the way it looks. It's kind of interesting.
So you think it'd be easier to find because it's something I've been able to. Anyways, this region, the lore there exists, and maybe some people haven't seen that map I'm thinking of, but I probably have it on Twitter somewhere, and I'll look for it here in a second. But yeah. So, anyways, I'm spacing the guest's name. You know who I'm talking about, the gentleman you've had on several times. That was the one speaking about the crucifixion of Christ, and many of the old paintings actually shows that famous church in Constantinople in the background.
Right, David Ewing Jr., right?
Yeah. And, so much of his work, and I'm sure you feel the same way, overlap. Like, I remember me and you specifically, our conversations that you had with him were like one-offs of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Here's like the Cusco, Jerusalem. Right.
Yeah. So
and it makes a lot of sense actually when you say that, because I mean the way it's laid out as a grid, it does seem kind of like that same sort of Jerusalem idea, or like a God's human city, a city run by the gods for humans. And it's all these epicenters of genetic modification. Like we have all these records of things like corn or cotton or strange things that emerge out of places like this. We're like, wow, how did corn happen? Like it seems like clearly genetically modified, but we're supposed to believe these are, simple folk that weren't able to genetically modify corn. Yet here it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's like completely could jump us into a million different correlations there. Talking about mummy corn. You find corn entombed in tombs all around the world, everywhere. China, Russia, all across the Americas, the Yucatan, Egypt. Corn, mummy corn, quote unquote mummy corn. That's what they were captioning it or calling it in the 1800s. Some of it was in such a great state of preservation that they planted it, and it grew. Here's the craziest thing about it is that not only did it grow over 15 feet tall, the corn itself, the ears, they didn't start until like 9 feet up. So like a normal human wasn't even able to harvest this corn without a ladder.
Wow.
And they found it to be incredibly drought resistant. Sorry. The leaves were a dark green, unlike anything they'd ever seen. And they find this same thing with mummy wheat and all of these kind of agricultural staples, right? Wheat was primarily supposed to be kind of a European thing, and they're finding ancient wheat here in tombs in America. Same thing goes for corn. And all these other things, right? Mummy cocaine, all these different substances that in these time frames were coming from very particular parts of the world, but were found all over. And just, again, reigniting the idea of we're dealing with a global civilization, right? That you covered so many times, the Tartaria thing, that we're dealing with a culture that was like Etruria and, like many of the cultures of the Yucatan, this Atlantean idea. These cultures were well aware of everybody. There was no part of the realm that hadn't been explored, right? And if you can take this to even farther down a rabbit hole and talk about, the poles, the South Pole or the ice wall, whatever your opinion of Earth shape is, and the northern latitudes, right, beyond 80, below 80, and that what happened before this kind of idea of seasons and poles and ice, right? And that just about every ancient culture, and all the old maps, mid 1500s, show a northern latitude that is free from ice, as well as a southern latitude that's free from ice. And when we talk about, advanced cultures and so on and so forth, people often try to think, the Atlantis thing has kind of whitewashed it a bit as far as like technology. People think, we're dealing with these dirigibles and flying ships, although that may be true. I think to an extent it was more of a
18th century renaissance of that awareness. Yeah.
It was more like an Avatar type thing for me.
Yeah.
It was like more advanced,
techno-Gaia,
natural advanced, right? We had huge animals, right? Man and beast walked together, and it wasn't always this horrible, terrible relationship. I think there was some symbiosis between man and animal.
And when you say the Arcturians, are you talking about like the Semitic Urati, like Uratu too? Is this what you mean, or who are the Arcturians?
Well, the Uratu, yeah. This is where you get the bridges, as you were already stating, between Indo-Scythian, Indo-Aryan, right? The bridge there, the Black and the Caspian bridge between what's a Scythian and what's an Etruscan. And, you've covered a lot of these, and how they just start coming up with words to describe all these different cultures. But really,
Right.
fundamentally, they're almost all going back to what we started our conversation with, that like the mushroom idea, and that we all kind of come from one.
Yeah, imagine trying to
one
explain
seed.
French Canadians in 1,000 years. It's gonna be like, what? We got a comment from Jose Rodriguez, which says Corimeo, is that how I say it? Curimeo was just talking about this Earth and showing the picture of the city in Cusco being the Citadel of David with the 3 walls, etc. So that's good. 100th monkey. People are becoming aware. I like that a lot, because when you go to South America, you start to see just like megalithic structures and neoclassical architecture, and it just doesn't really fit. You're like, why would they put so much effort into this place? It's more effort than you'd think possible. Like, it actually looks nicer than in a lot of places in Europe. It's just incredible, really, and it's a lot older looking in a lot of situations, and just the most far out flung crazy places, like in Colombia, the cathedral in the middle of the mountains and everything, like monasteries.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm very familiar with that one.
Yeah,
it makes absolutely no sense. And that's kind of everything in this realm. I'm going to take a quick little break. My baby's awake. I'm going to take him downstairs. I'll be right back.
Okay, for sure. While he's jumping out for a second, let me go over some of the things I saw on his channel that were pretty cool. So, looking at the Archivist channel, he did some things talking about New Eden, right? So if I go to his YouTube channel, actually, and go to Archivist, you can go to the top. Should be what? I must have double clicked it or something. See, they just unsubscribe me. Guys, if you ever think, oh yeah, I'm subscribed to somebody, make sure you go back and click it again. Or don't click it again, but make sure you're clicked. Or maybe that's what happens. Is that what happens when people unclick? God only knows. Is this the one? Anomalies in America. Anomalous in America. I'm gonna go to live. It was near the top. Eden in America. Yeah. So in his Eden in America video, he talked a bit about all this Phoenician art, right? And so when you start looking into the Phoenician understanding of art, this is already happening 100 years ago, where they're saying, hey, we were finding examples of this in South America as well. But also, there's a bunch of stuff that they find in North America that gets kind of suppressed and purchased up by religious organizations and social utopian philanthropists who want to put them in museums. And almost everything is said to become, is a forgery. They're always like, oh, well, turned out that there was nothing here. But it's always in a part of the United States where someone wants to own a huge amount of land, that they want to tear out everything and they want to have just grazing of cattle or something like that. So it becomes pretty interesting, because we're like, well, all these places in the Midwest, let me see if I can find that map, where they major grazing of cattle and everything. This is all in this area here that was at one point sea and flooded. So, this area all gets completely covered over. We're not able to look at it. Then we start to look at the history of the mining operations, right? So about what happened in California with the gold rush, but then in Nevada you have all the silver mining that goes on. And so silver mining, they're blowing up entire mountains and they're going into the mountains themselves. So silver mining is a little bit more intense. Instead of just like trying to shatter a mountain and pour the gold powder out as it floods out. Oh, I think Ben's back. I was just
Sorry
talking
about that.
That was cool. I was just talking about silver mining and how, you know, you look at the Midwest and how places where they had a bunch of the Egyptian style ruins, like you were finding in some of this video here, you know, you show kind of the stuff here. Like we found stuff like that, but they're in areas of the United States that's been flooded out. But maybe you want to go into a bit about like discoveries in Indiana and Midwest and America.
Yeah, you know, again, I guess kind of the idea of this episode is my, you know, the kind of the, you know, to steal a line from Hermes, right? As above, so below.
Mm-hmm.
As within, so without. That we inhabit a world that is like a macro, micro representation of ourselves. And the idea that we come from a time where consciousness perhaps was quite different than we think of it today. And that one of my favorite authors, Julian Jaynes, describes Eden as a time before mankind had that inner dialogue, that kind of analog, again, where I get my name, or at least, you know, my nickname, so to say, the analog eye, that ability to have self-awareness and to speak internally, so to say. And that, you know, I've talked about this book a lot, and if you're not familiar with it, listeners out there, I can't recommend a book more than this book. It'll change the way you think about everything. But basically, he describes Eden, right? You have male and female.
Sorry, this is Julian Joyce, or who is this?
Julian Jaynes.
Julian Jaynes, and which book is it?
The Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. It's my number one book of all time. Really helped me come to terms with kind of a deeper understanding of not only dream state, but this realm we inhabit, meaning, purpose, all history. But his explanation of Eden is that Eden was an age of innocence. It was a time of innocence, right? That's kind of, that exists in religious explanation. But what he means by an age of innocence was that you didn't have dialogue. You didn't have an interior self. There was no awareness, right? What separates man from beast is often the main descriptor is that they're unaware of themselves, at least from an idea of consciousness, that they're almost like a program. And I know me and you have covered the gamut in many years past, talking about, you know, the AI programming, right? I think it's GAN and WAN. I may be pronouncing those wrong. If there's a programming here or somebody that knows, maybe you do. The two types of coding, right? There's GAN and WAN. I can't remember how to say them exactly. One is more adversarial, me versus X, and the other one is more like everything needs to coalesce and come together to improve the system. And
Do
I
you
think
mean like
that's
a global area network versus a wide wireless?
No, it's a type of coding, and I'm probably saying the wrong thing, but there's two types of it, and one is a like I was saying, one's like a think of it like one's a me versus simulation, and the other one's it's like one's Farmville and one's like a first-person shooter. I know that's a horrible adjective to use to describe it. But anyway,
what is a first-person shooter and what is Farmville in that analogy?
Well, like one is about a society that is 100% coalescing for the greater good of the society. And the other one would be a more representation of the kind of society we have today, for the most part. where you're constantly obsessing about your tiny little bubble, the little world you live in, and how you can make the world, the tiny little bubble
So
world you live in.
one is like chiseling and like gardening, and the other one is like growing, or one is sculpting and one is growing, right? Like one is you're removing things, like in a first person shooter you're removing elements from the equation, and in a Farmville you're creating and allowing things to grow, manifest,
Sure.
following laws of physics.
Yeah, it was probably a poor analogy on my part, but yes, one is about your place in the world and how you contribute to it, and the other one is more about the things you can do to collect more things, to draw more things into yourself, into individual versus collective. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
So Julian's idea of Eden, and whenever I talk about these places again, whether or not Eden is described as a physical place, people have heard me talk about it with Dr. Longo, that Eden was in Florida. I've done plenty of presentations where people have talked about Eden was in the Yucatan or in the Gulf of Mexico somewhere. And although I love all those stories, fundamentally those stories come from an internal space for me. And what Julian did is explain that in a way. I'm going to quote something.
Sure.
This is a book. Give me 1 second. Sorry. This is a book called Eden by Eve Wood Langford. And she kind of does a synopsis or quote of his work that I really love. So I'm just going to read that for everybody. Maybe it'll help explain this book is really, it's one of those things that it's kind of difficult to explain. Basically what he says is that all of the kings were made kings by the gods, and all of the people that were made subjects were subjects of the king, who was the voice, the physical voice of God. And that all of these kings and leaders were getting internal messages, right? So their internal dialogue was not themselves. It was something exterior to them. I mean, you can look through, pretty much all of the Old Testament is like this, right? The people lucky enough to hear the voice of God are then, tasked with relaying this message to the populace. And basically what he says is that the people were incapable of saying, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. And that they were kind of like an ant colony. There was a queen and they were all serving the queen in a way. Again, that's an analogy. And that they were all getting this internal voice of God, that before what he called the segmentation or the splitting of the hemispheres, the left and right parts of the brain, that we were all unable to even have those thoughts. And that we were, as soon as the code or the voice of God, think of it kind of like the voice of God technology that people talk about that the government has today, that when the signal was cut, people were just like wandering aimlessly, so to say. And that through, again, I'm generalizing here, but through the development of language, humans were slowly able to develop that interior dialogue, right? You've heard this before, I'm sure, that without language, consciousness as we know it wouldn't be what it is today. Now, you can manipulate the idea of consciousness just by changing the person's language. And for anybody that's studied other languages, it's very easy to see this, right? That you could say the same sentence in two languages, but they're going to have completely different ways of getting to that explanation. And that the feeling that comes from that, sentence or explanation can create a completely different feeling about the subject. But anyway, so essentially that we partook of the fruit, and that was when the ability to be self-aware, right? That's when they knew they were naked. Does that make sense? That they didn't even know that they were themselves until this particular thing happened. Now, he's not saying that it was one split second and then all of a sudden all of mankind was conscious. Instead, he says that this was a kind of slow progression over time, and that the priests and the kings could read and write and were aware of language and all of these things, but it took thousands of years as it slowly trickled down. And although I don't necessarily prescribe to that, and neither does he, but he's quoted as saying that poets were the original gods, and that the idea that your word and your sentence and your verbiage and your vernacular was what was creating the reality around you. And I know this is a subject matter we've talked about before, but your word is your wand. This is a thing that kind of existed in Blavatsky-esque subcultures and secret societies, so to say, that we're trying to remember this age where you were speaking your reality into existence. And that part of what I think was this transitory period, whatever you want to call it, in the 1800s, a reset, everybody has a different explanation for it, was part of this. Almost like we jumped into another stage of consciousness, good or bad. And that has to do with the whole idea that we've lost our connection with the past and we're, kind of physical beings with amnesia. And that's where subjects like the baby farms and all of these things, where you can just kind of go crazy talking about all these endless explanations of what possibly could have happened. And but yeah, that was a long-winded answer. I'm going to read this little excerpt here. Before Adam tasted the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge of all things in the Garden of Eden, the Lord gave him the task of naming the newly created animals. And out of the ground the Lord formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. This charming biblical illustration chronicles an important stage in human evolution, revealing that before Adam gained his mind-opening form of precipitous, he was capable of speech. Pre-wise Eve demonstrated the same verbal ability by conversing with the serpent. This biblical record of the spoken word prior to the evolution of higher consciousness is compatible with more recent proposals that consciousness evolved through the use of language. The matter is explored by Julian Jaynes in The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of a Bicameral Mind. Julian Jaynes does not deem consciousness essential to the acquisition of fundamental skills or to simple reasoning, or even to a certain level of thinking. He compares it to a mental analog of the real world, much as a map is an analog of the land it represents. Though the human brain is enclosed in darkness, precipitant humans equipped with an abstract image of self, or I, can conjure onto their mental map scenarios past, present, or imagined, imaged in a possible future. Consciousness enables the human mind to see possibilities, wrestle with ideas, and grasp abstract concepts. If you see what I mean. The view of sentient is not inconsistent with the simple Gnostic proposal that when humans attained wisdom in Eden, the eyes of the mind were opened to entirely new mental vistas. In myth, history, changes to human story may legitimately take place in the blink of an eye, but in the real world, fundamental change may take a great deal longer. So thank you for letting me quote that there. But yeah, I hope that kind of gave people a bit of a better idea of what I'm trying to say. That we take for granted these ideas of speech and rhetoric and what they actually mean to our reality.
Speaking of which, 499 from Ryzen Ability says, Andreas is everywhere by Muhammad's red beard. And hey, Ben, hope all is well, bro. Research the meme mounds. All right, well, have you researched the meme mounds? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Meme mounds? No.
All right, well, that'll be a thing that we can look into in the future, yeah.
I've heard meme mounds, but I have no idea where they are, and I've never looked into them, so I'm going to have to take your advice.
I have some thoughts on Egypt, on ancient Eden, and so they might be kind of opposite in some respects. Hear me out. So, because of that, hearing that humans were able to speak and that they knew the right names, I think the other thing is God's like, okay, what are these things called? Like, because God could have either asked or not asked. And so for humans to be asked, it's either a complete joke or it's because it's right. And usually I think it's because it's right. So humans knew what the right thing was. The other thing is humans were able to speak to animals. I mean, you got humans speaking to a serpent, which isn't necessarily Lucifer, and it's much later that all gets conflated as that idea, right? This cunning beast of the field. So it's really like not surprising.
Yeah, it used to be like a dove before the whole serpent.
It's not surprising that these animals are talking to them. They're not surprised. So that's interesting. She's not like, oh, whoa, a talking snake, So that means that this is normal. So they're at a perfect consciousness at that point. And when they eat from the tree of knowledge, it's like there's the tree of life and there's the tree of knowledge. Maybe it's kind of Orwellian. Like the tree of knowledge took away their complete understanding of consequentialism and replaced it with good and evil, and we are building upon good and evil until we can get back to a place where we know all things so that we can get rid of good and evil, right?
Yeah, very Buddha-esque of you.
I hope not.
Buddha describes the transition very similar, that we go through stages like that, where we like slip, we forget it all for the sake of evolution, we relearn, like you said, we go through this whole dualistic right and wrong, right? And then we get to the end of that rainbow and we realize that they're all the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And then we are on the upswing of that, where there is no confusion. We understand completely and wholly that these two ideas are really one, and that you can't have night without day, and you know what I'm saying,
right?
And then we lose it all again.
Like a bell
and we
curve.
go through. I mean, I think the Bhagavad Gita says a very similar thing.
Yeah.
That there's a period of learning and a period of forgetting. And it's just like this never-ending spiral.
I when I say I hope not, like I agree that that's probably what's happening. But like one of the things that you'd hope is that there is an escape or an escape velocity. Like there's an ascension point where you can become another thing, a newer, bigger, move on to a new challenge kind of thing. Because the idea that we're constantly just breathing in and out, it's like it's okay, but it would be nice if it had more like that, because it feels like that's the trap, right? Like to be breathing in and out, to be the breath, instead of being able to escape and to become, your own. And so in a lot of ways, we're trapped by ignorance, and the fact that we forget everything every generation. I mean, and it's true, like we would be really traumatized if we like lived more than a lifetime to have to remember everything. So, but why can't we handle that? And is it just, why is there so much suffering? And, all that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, again, I certainly don't want to give in any kind of air of arrogance when it comes to these ideas. I truly believe that everybody has to, walk the walk, narrow is the path, right? You have to knock, you have to ask, and these parables of Jesus and all these other kind of prophets. The journey is yours, and I can't tell you how to walk it or do it or live it or see it or anything at all, and that's certainly not what I'm trying to do. But I just think there's so much tied up in the symbology of what is Eden and who are Adam and Eve, and what is their symbolical journey of consuming the fruit and realizing they're naked and leaving the garden and touching a little bit on these kind of the parables of it all. It always seems to kind of at least put me at ease in whatever hardships I'm going through in my own life. Just pausing and thinking about the Adam and Eve story has always been a good one for me. And but yeah, Julian, again, his book is incredibly, it's a difficult read. It's dense. But by the end of it, I strongly think that if it doesn't make you rethink some things, it could completely rewrite the way you look at the world.
I definitely agree with a lot of the message there. So, like, I mean, first off, what's interesting is it's not saying we're starting without the ability of language. It's acknowledging that we're starting with language. So, in a way, it's a de-escalation from singularity and new sphere into the personal computer, being self-aware, which is good and bad, so it's showing that. But it's interesting because a lot of people try to say we started with less and we become more. And here's the thing where we were all one and we become a mosaic. I like any concept that can be like primordial like that, like getting back to an Adam and Eve thing. I think like I was thinking any concept where critical testing cannot be imagined is an approximation, and metrics, have to emerge somehow from a more primitive principle set.
Yeah.
So,
well said. And I think that was kind of a complex way of saying, like the idea that we come from like, space amoebas or whatever is nonsense. That there is a base, and it's far more involved than we're led to believe. And that's why I chose that particular quote, was that, it shows you that there's, even though it's zero and you're back in Eden, it's not zero as we think of it, right? We're not mindless apes banging on sticks, banging on rocks with sticks or whatever. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm getting at?
right. Yeah.
Like
it's
when you
total
talked about
harmony.
when you said God asked them, he didn't ask them as a joke, right? And that whether or not these things are real, again, our idea of what is real, something everybody needs to ask themselves, and then that could send you on a 20-year journey, and just in and of itself. But anyways, that no matter what, it's that base, that the reset point, I think, is Eden is always what I come back to, and that there is some kind of fundamental starting point. And language, it always comes back to language for me. And I think that the whole idea of Babel, and kind of like you said, why is there hardship and pain and all these things? And, you couldn't have any joy without pain, and, this whole human struggle. Again,
it feels like original sin has to do with like the original, like, so we have the unmoved mover is like St. Thomas Aquinas calls God. So there's something that's unmoved to start with, and it's moving, and that's antithetical to the rest of physics, right? So, but that's like what we've proven the Higgs boson does, which is pretty interesting. That's literally the idea, is that something that is unmoved and moves things. But then you also have this idea of original sin, because things have started moving things in a negative direction. So until we stop that negative direction, then it continues to affect things. And so things continue to affect outwards, even from some original action that is causing further trauma, right? So
I think that's where and Julian says it himself, that the lodestone, the kind of magnetic stone worship, came from exactly what you just described. The immovable object moving everything around it, or at least imparting some kind of effect upon it, right? And this is kind of the whole symbolic nature of Mount Meru. And Rupus Negra, and this central tree or pillar that's magnetic of some kind, and why people were worshiping these stones. Even in this day, the idea that Julian breaks down is that after this breakdown of the bicameral mind, and people no longer had that internal voice, that the rocks were talking. That these magnetic lodestones were speaking, and that they would carry them and build a temple around them and worship them. And that was the first idol, so to say, was stones, and then they became statues, right? They would develop some kind of, that's human nature. Is we look at the sky and we see a hunter with a bow, right? Anthropomorphism, we attach things that we see in our own physical representation onto our spiritual kind of representations, and that these stones went from just being these lumps of stone to slowly being sculpted into statues, and then gods and idols were statues or carved little dolls, or every culture kind of had their own slow migration away from that. And I think that you touched on it there perfectly, that the unmovable that moves, you find that in every culture. And I think it goes back to this kind of idea of Eden, and that religion kickstarts in this spiraling away from those points.
And so we also have, we've got Eden, Atlantis, and Zion. Like the return to Zion is, so you got Atlantis is like a city that is kind of it's out of Eden in a sense. Like, because when we think of Eden, we think of this natural, we're in nature perfectly. And Atlantis is maybe like they're genetically modifying things, and we think of it as a metropolitan. But this return to Zion is interesting, because the idea of Zion is to approach Eden again, right? To get to a place that's as indistinguishable of a boundary between Eden and in nature and in perfect harmony, so that it's like a smooth and easy transition.
It's kind of like Edgar Casey described Atlantis and Lemuria, similar to what you're saying. That the Lemurians were like the Avatar-esque people. They lived on the land. They spoke with the trees. They were one and the same with animals. You know, man and nature lived together. And then the Atlanteans were trying to capitalize on everything and consume and mine and grow and technology. And so they were like two growing powers, but on completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And you know, his story is that the Atlantis and Lemuria went to war with each other, and then it was just like the story of Avatar, that you had the men in ships looking for more rare earth minerals to mine, and they're warring with the people that, you know, are living off the land and are in tune with the earth, and so on and so forth. And I think it's kind of the same concept of human evolution. You know, they're just on two different spirals away from the same point. They're the same consciousness in a sense, but they're moving in just different directions on different ends of that kind of magnetic spectrum. You know, whether or not Lemuria and Atlantis were really cultures that warred with one another, the symbology is more of what I really hearken to.
Right. Do you have thoughts on, like, so like we looked earlier at the Pacific what interior seaway, western interior seaway?
Oh yeah, you asked me questions and I had to walk away. Sorry.
No, it's cool. I was just curious. Do you have thoughts on this idea of, you know, the water world era and it being like much more recent, and you've done a lot of maps looking at like river systems and
yeah, we've talked about Waterworld many years ago. That movie is fantastic, and the symbolism there, the map on the girl's back, right? The central island that's left.
Yeah.
And yeah, I talk about Noah a lot and how these myths of a ship, you know, what is an ark in a ship? That's just the mind. And Noah builds a ship to weather the storm. You know, is that some kind of analogy for human consciousness? And this goes back to what we were talking about already about God had them naming the beasts and the fowl and all these things, right? So you know, Noah was also named Janus, someone that you've heard me speak about before. And that in alchemical text, Janus is again the lodestone. The two faces are just the magnetic poles, and that human consciousness, the way the actual brain waves function, is almost identical to this idea of a magnet. Our brains are just magnetic pulsating. You know, obviously that's kind of a bit of an easy glancing over the idea, but yeah, here we go. The top one. Click on that. I'll read this really quick. Those wit had the best edge and came nearest the splitting of the hair. His who said that the lodestone is the real Janus because of its two opposite faces or poles, one whereof it's a little hard. One whereof can contest, one whereof confronteth the north, the other the south, or his who called it the egg and epitome of the terrestrial globe, because as the egg contains the idea of the whole and every part of its protoplast or generant, again this is Middle English, so doth the lodestone comprehend the idea of the whole and every part of the earth and inherit all its properties, being generated thereby at least therein, or his who named it the nest of wonders, because as a nest of boxes it includes many admirable secrets, one within another, insomuch that no man can well understand the mystical platform of its nature, till he hath opened and speculated them all one after another, or his who affirmed it to be the antitype of the poet's hydra, because no sooner hath the sword of reason cut off the head, or capital difficulty, but two new ones spring up in the place of it, nor ought any man to hope the total and absolute conquest thereof by cauterizing the veins of every difficulty, i.e., leaving not so much as the seeds of a scrupular. Anyways, people get the idea there. That's from like a. Will you go back and see if on my post there if I put a date on that? It's like 1600s, that book.
Yeah, hold on. Let me go back. Where did I have that open? Oops.
It's not really important.
I have it somewhere. Hold on.
People have heard me talk about Janus and yeah.
There we go, right here. And then this was
it's okay. It's 1600s, I'm pretty sure. Pretty certain.
If I look for Janus, 1654.
Yeah.
There we go.
You guys can look that book up.
Yeah.
The singularity, the phenomenon of the lodestone. I believe you can find it on Google Books or Archive.
Interesting talking about protoplast, so the first formed, right? So even talking about this idea, in the 1600s of a first formed protoplast, they're already talking about this idea of like primordial life that has in it a world. This idea that every life is made in the image of God, essentially. That's the protoplast. And
it's
also
like a hermetic jar, so to say.
Yeah. Google Earth Grand Canyon we were looking at the other day, and it was interesting because, we remember in the days gone by the idea like how much of it looks like just electrical, like something's been shocked with electricity, and that it's like maybe that has something to do with this sort of like life, like the lightning strike that makes life possible or something,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Grand Canyon's a crazy place for sure, and it shows obvious signs to me of electrical discharge.
Have you read the Book of Jubilees?
Oh yeah.
So what do you think about that? Like, it's an interesting thing where they talk about like after Adam and Eve are trying to grow things in the wilderness, and they're told to put thorns around it because it's burned down by God.
Yeah.
Or is it burned down by God?
They're set to defend a world that's been destroyed, or defend themselves from a world that's been destroyed.
Yeah.
It's like Job in a lot of these, biblically quote endorsed texts that were left out.
Really interesting book on suffering and how like suffering is, subatomic particles. Essentially, it's like don't blame me, blame what it is now. This is
Jubilees, giants. Enoch. It's funny because these subjects that me and you have talked about for so many years exist in even greater detail in those books.
Right.
And to a even greater detail, right? That the world was inhabited, that we fell, so to say, that the world was covered in giant trees and animals, and that they were all wiped from the earth.
And probably giant dookie.
But yeah, I mean, you've heard me, in stellium, and it's a subject that's been around for many, many years, the giant tree topic. But
right.
It's definitely something that I prescribe to more and more. And, we talked a little bit at the beginning about newspapers, but yeah, the kind of trees that they were finding and at what locations and localities, how you couldn't think that we at least come from an age where everything was gigantic. If not people, at least the animals and the fauna and trees were absolutely monstrous. What are we looking at here?
Oh, I just pulled up some of your World Fair artwork. You pulled St. Louis World Fair in 1904. I was just looking at some of those pictures.
I just love that style.
Yeah, right.
Of painting or drawing, whatever these are. So if I can find them, I always post the artwork. I just think it's beautiful.
Beautiful renderings, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was another. Let me go back a page here because wait.
I cut you off. We never went back to talking about rivers and.
Well, yeah, I had some thoughts. Yeah,
I do believe that is a good representation of what the northern latitudes looked like at one particular point. I have a video. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but I talk about a cavern system that it exists in the Rocky Mountains, and it goes from Canada all the way to the Gulf of Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it describes a a world where a race of beings left the surface to survive a cataclysm or survive giant monsters. Dragons, particularly, is what it says. But yeah, they go on to describe that the origin of the Gulf Stream is from inside the Rocky Mountains, and that there is a volcanic river or ocean that goes from, Canada all the
I
way
feel
to
like
the
if
Rocky
people had to
Mountains.
escape giant birds like this and they called them dragons, I'm all right with it. We're like, hey, that's not a dragon. No, dude, if you were being chased down by some of these things and they were taller than you, they have razor sharp beaks, I'm pretty sure that's bad enough. I'll call it a dragon. That's a dragon. That's fine. You can call that a dragon.
Yeah, feathered serpents. I mean, what better representation would there be than some of these feathered birds that were? Yeah, I have an article, and some of these are just going to be off the top of my head, but it's about a cave they found, and I want to say the Badlands, but I can't remember exactly. I read this article on, I think, my first interview on the Higher Side Chats. And basically, in this cave, they described that there was a deluge that had shoved all these animals. Like, all these animals had looked for shelter, right? There was some cataclysm going on, and everything you can imagine was rushing into this cave to wait out the storm, so to say. And in this cave, they find all kinds of crazy monsters. I hate to use the word monster, but, cave bears that are like 20 feet tall. But they find, birds, winged birds that have 50-foot wingspans. And they find humans in the same cave. So man and beast all flocking into this cave to survive this deluge. And eventually the water got high enough that it flooded the cave. So there was enough time where the water level was coming up, at least slowly enough that everyone could retreat into this cave, right? Because if it was just like an instant tsunami that covered the entire realm, nothing would be able to get into these caves. And this isn't the only one. I have
Right.
5.
Sri Lanka, you had animals rushing to the top of the mountain for like a day before the thing happened, so they knew it was coming.
The animals, they always 48 hours, sometimes more, depending on the size. They know, and they just start heading up. They just go for high ground.
Unless they have a cave, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm sure people would follow this. I mean, think if you're intimately tied to your ground and your stock and everything living around you, you would see the warning signs and know, I don't know what's coming, but they're running, so I'm going with them, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, in this cave, they find dozens of people. They find every kind of animal you can imagine, giant birds, blah, blah, blah. Now, what makes this interesting is that still to this day, when there's a hurricane in the Everglades or all along, even in Texas, but primarily in the Everglades, I talked about this on Old World Florida, that all the animals that naturally, under normal circumstances, would eat each other or would be, feeding, living off these other creatures, that when there's a hurricane, there's no war. They all retreat into the cypress tree. A farmer was a giant cypress had fallen over during a hurricane, and I want to say this is in the 1920s, 1930s. A bunch of cypresses had fallen over on this farmer's field, and he found inside the cypress tree like 30 animals, dogs, reptiles, everything that you would think would never be found within a foot of each other. They were all clogged into this tree. And that made me think, just kind of like the Avatar idea and what I had found in these cave systems, that when shit hits the fan, nobody cares about what's for dinner,
Yeah.
It's just survive, and that these trees were many representations of perhaps, several ages before, when there were trees several miles tall. And yeah, I mean, even in the early 1900s, mining companies were digging, they dig these prospecting tunnels, shafts, so they could see how deep the coal went, where the deepest part was, because they wanted they preferred it to be close to the surface and a certain amount of thickness. Like, they wouldn't bring in all their equipment, dig down 20 feet for 2 feet of coal. They wanted a coal seam that was 100, 200, 400 feet thick that was relatively close to the surface. So they'd just be drilling these shafts all over the place. And this is from the late 1800s to like World War I. And when they're drilling these shafts, they're hitting all kinds of crazy shit. I mean, I found standing forests where the trees are still standing straight up all over the East Coast, and dozens of them. So these mining companies are drilling, and at 20 feet, 80 feet, 200 feet, they're finding full forests.
Wow.
Full standing forests. Some of them are laid over. Some of them are standing straight up. And they find some of these trees are over 1,000 feet tall. In fact, one mining company pulled out an entire tree, and it was 1,000 feet. And it wasn't even the whole tree. So
wow.
I have a lot of
was
questions.
It? Yeah, exactly.
And there's another one in Colorado that was 900 feet. And they said that I believe it was a botanist. I'm not quite sure what expert they had that got involved on it. But he basically said that this was just a limb. This wasn't even the trunk. Because you could tell by the shape of the growth that it wasn't actually the solid trunk of the tree. And it was 900 feet long.
Wow. So
and they find...
Yeah, keep going.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask because mesas and stuff. Some of the mesas we see are like this, but they're at like a higher level. It looks like, right?
Yeah.
And, except they're finding root structures to mesas now.
Yep.
So, I mean, what does that mean about trees that are way lower? You know,
they find tunnels that they say, oh, well, there was when the natives built their little tiny pueblos or whatever on the top of them, that it was all military, like they did it to survive. But I have articles, and I talk about them in my Anomalous America series, from Utah and Arizona and Colorado, where they find tunnel systems that they can't even reach the end of them. And in fact, I think it was one of my Nevada episodes. I think I labeled it the deep underground bases are ancient tunnels. And there's no way that people could have dug all of these. And when you compare the anatomy of the inside of these mountains and their water tunnels, right? Or what they call the drainage from the snowfall. That's how they describe them, is that the snowfall will drain, or the rainfall will create these shapes. Well, it's nonsense. And a lot of these mountains have spelunking maps, right? The ones that have been thoroughly explored. And when you compare a spelunking map next to a tree, and how they actually siphon water through their root structures up the tree, right? Because they use cavitation. They look the exact same.
I used to go spelunking a lot, like as a Boy Scout, and like that was one of the things you could do to like earn a merit badge. Like I think they stopped doing this just about the time I was a kid.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because it was too dangerous.
Yeah, but like we would go to places like in Moaning Cavern that they're like, no one's ever been down this cave before, and like you guys get to go, and you're like, well, no one can fit down this cave except for like this like relatively small person, who's like, yeah, I get what's going on, but yeah, the more you look at it from the inside out, it does kind of feel like the mycelial net or a root structure where all where pockets can hold liquid and dirt and sediment that has minerals and everything so that they can feed later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just going back again through, I guess connecting the dots back to the as I always do, the newspapers, the evidence for giant trees. Now, it may be too much for people to wrap their mind around a 1, 2, 4, 10 mile tall tree. And that some of these big mesas are just lopped off trees. But since you brought up the Book of Jubilees, and I was mentioning the Book of Enoch and Jasher, there's so many good ones. Job is one of my favorite, although that's for the most part included in the biblically endorsed text. But Enoch especially, they talk quite distinctly about the giant fauna,
right,
and how it was all wiped. But yeah, there's a lot of evidence for it. And if we're not going, to absolutely mountain-sized trees, I have enough evidence to show that at least, one, quote, epoch or generation, right? One generation for me and you, 2 or 3, I suppose, right? 1800s, that all this was found everywhere. West of the Mississippi was a complete mystery, at least to what I'm able to use and find written in a kind of public record that's available to me in a digital format. But yeah, I mean, the mining companies, they knew, because the first things that a mining company would grab is the low-hanging fruit, so to say, the stuff on the surface, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to dig down 100 feet if it's all on the surface.
If you have trains, you can pick up things all over this really quickly.
Yeah, the petrified forests, the whole realm was covered in petrified forests. Covered. I think just about every state I've done has had a petrified forest. Every single one. And the one in Oregon was pretty amazing. The one in Colorado was amazing. They were finding seeds that were this big.
Mm-hmm.
Seeds. Like seeds that you find, like a pine nut. They were bowling ball size. You know, what kind of tree is that? Pine cones that were huge, 2.5 feet long, 20-pound pine cones. They find apples that are huge. They find coconuts that are 3 times, 4 times bigger, and they've completely been turned into quartz.
Right.
They found a standing petrified forest in eastern Oregon that was full 30 miles. You could go 30 miles, 30 square miles. Every tree was petrified, standing.
Where is this?
This was in Oregon.
Look this up, petrified forest.
You won't find anything, but you can look. It's on my Twitter, I'm pretty sure.
I'll pull, see what I can find, yeah.
Yeah, it's on my Twitter, I'm sure. Just type in petrified forest. But that's not the only one. I mean, this is every state. California was one of the best examples of a petrified forest.
Of course, cut them down
they
so
find
can make
standing forests inside caves. That's a good one. Go back.
Inside the earth, remarkable orifice underneath Ponca, compared to which the Mammoth Cave is a mere puncture in the ground. One of the fishiest yarns yet printed. Petrified forest, decidedly fishy.
So he went down in the bowels of the earth, 1,500 feet from the surface, and there discovered a continuation of a cavern miles in extent, 800 feet high. So this is a cave, 800 feet high, and filled with a standing petrified forest.
I've been in like 800 feet high caves. Like, I know these exist. There's tons of caverns that are huge, enormous.
Yeah, but you've been in one where there's a forest.
Not
you're walking through a forest. And
I can't tell you about that. I'm not allowed to talk about that, but.
Well, yeah, I mean,
the point is, a cavern that large isn't impossible or anything. Like, someone's making it sound like this is crazy for all the wrong reasons. Like, yeah, this is exactly.
And what's funny is, like, I post these, and then years later, there'll be some TikTok video. I don't know if you've seen it, but there is a famous cave that they found recently in China, that had a forest in it. I don't know if you saw all the video. They rappelled down into it, and they show the standing trees. Yeah. And here I was showing.
Yep. Okay, yeah. I saw something like this in Indonesia also. There's like a cave like this.
Yeah, I went in a cave kind of like this in Thailand. It didn't have huge, like, 100-foot tall trees. They were just shrubs, but it was still unbelievable. But yeah, I mean, the cave system stuff is like, I don't want to say it's my bread and butter, but because we've mentioned so many things, but caves, what's buried beneath our feet, standing petrified forests that are on ground level. Yeah, I mean, they found ones in Colorado that were standing, where they're like riding their horses through a petrified forest where the fruit is still there. Like the one in Oregon, it had tropical fruit. I can't remember exactly what it was, if it was oranges or citrus of some kind. But
remember that movie Journey to the Center of the Earth?
This is the 1800s, right? Where they're finding all kinds of stuff that defies explanation. And it's not just one subject. It's giant animals, creatures, people. Yeah, this is
It's crazy how Journey to the Center of the Earth has got everything in it. It's like all true. Come on. Like every part of it. Like giant creatures, plants that are trying to reach light, giant mushroom forests, or whatever that ends up meaning, because what we understand about silicone trees and everything else, that they could have been, the excretions of mineral deposits from mycelial networks making giant trees, right? There's just so many things that
I'm not going to dispute that, because unfortunately, when you look at a certain types of mushrooms, they do have very similar structure to trees.
Yeah.
Very similar. So, I mean, I've heard that before. People were like, what do you think about the giant trees being giant mushrooms? I mean,
Why not?
It's far out. I can't say I totally, I would say that that's not possible. I mean, at this point, I'm open to anything. Yeah, I mean, they were writing about mushroom, 4, 5, 6 feet tall mushrooms in Eastern Oregon. In fact, the largest mushroom in the world still exists in Eastern Oregon.
Right. And there are, I mean, that one's miles wide, but there are giant mushrooms that are, but there are these are fake, but there are giant mushrooms that are just unbelievably huge that grow in deep forests. If you find like old growth forest, you'll end up finding like the largest, craziest mushrooms, obviously. And people are always look at her, look how happy she is. Look how happy that lady is that she found that mushroom. You know what I mean?
No, I mean, mushrooms are crazy. I mean, just mushrooms' ability to they can be parasitic. You know, they can completely take over a host and make them do all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, whole ant colonies can be completely made subject.
I remember walking around in, I think it was Bolivia, and there's a place they say was a giant mushroom. You're like standing on it, and you're like, this looks like lava flow, but it's really just fossilized mushroom, and it's miles wide. This giant layer like this.
That's crazy. Yeah, I don't doubt it. I mean, the way things can fossilize or petrify is absolutely mind bending to me.
Right.
And again, the newspapers really show you quite an unfiltered representation of what only just a few hundred years ago we were looking at. Yeah, I mean, you were showing that lizard in Journey to the Center of the Earth, and this is what I posted today.
Right. Giant petrified snake found with a human skeleton in it. Isaac Straw, farmer near Illyria, while digging a cistern, unearthed one of the most wonderful specimens of geology science ever found in this country. 17 feet below the surface, in a marl deposit, he found the skeleton of an immense serpentine alligator containing the remains of a human. See, I find that also interesting because talking about serpent and then this idea of alligator and how we talk about in Eden, the serpent losing its feet and legs, right, as part of its, So its length was 21 feet. The 7 feet of its tail is composed of 17 rattles. Okay, so this is slightly different than an alligator. You're already seeing what we're talking about. The colossal skeleton of a man holding a stone hammer with the same tenacity he did when the monster swallowed him lay in the huge stomach. All right, so...
Yeah, and like, again, for anybody new to my material, something like that is just ridiculous. But, I have
concurrent
9,000 posts, and I'd say probably 4,000 of those are newspaper articles. And this isn't the first lizard with a human inside of it. I've found more than one.
Right.
And, the alligators and lizards, the largest skeleton I've ever found in a newspaper was 900 feet. So... And this is in the Gobi Desert, which
right. Well, I mean, if you look at lizards, they can keep growing, right? They keep eating, they keep growing. So
yeah, same with what is it? Is it sharks? Sharks do the same, right?
Sharks can keep growing. Yeah, there's certain things that it seems like we have hit like a peak of size right now, and I wonder if it has to do with like genetics hit a point where it realized smaller, rapiditous, having more young. Like this was like somehow. Like a disease, like a virus or something like that. So we're copying that same kind of idea of quick life, faster multiply in so many species, which, and I wonder about that too, because talking about lions laying with lambs and everything, this idea that everything has to be a carnivore. No, I am a carnivore, but at the same time, I get why it's interesting that we think that, like, gorillas aren't carnivores. Chickens can live off corn and chicken feed. A lot of reptiles can live off of a vegetarian diet. There were herbivore dinosaurs, right? This idea that there are so many reptiles that are vegetarian, there's so many kinds of species that are vegetarian. It is interesting. There doesn't really have to be carnivorous life, but it exists. It's something that's happened probably in a reaction to winter or environmental conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it can happen in an instant.
Yeah,
I mean one set of reptile exposed to the right circumstance that in like I think under a week can completely mutate and become a vegetarian. and that as soon as that food supply that's more profitable, so to say, right, more efficient, becomes available, they'll go back to eating meat. And animals do this all the time. Yeah, gorillas, I mean, what a prime example. Incredibly, I wouldn't say aggressive, and under the right circumstances, they certainly are.
Powerful, though, for sure. Big, powerful.
Yeah, our ideas of, what makes a carnivore and what, I think those things are more attached to these kind of physical markers, but then those are completely proven wrong with just the right lens to look through. But yeah, looking back on our history, which is, I mean, that's mine and yours relationship has been basically an open source conversation about all things weird and ponderous of our past. And again, the medium I've chosen so much to focus on being these newspapers, it has really been quite amazing. And, could many of them be wrong and false reports? I hate that I have to bring this up all the time, but people seem to get caught on the fact that I believe every single article I read. I certainly don't. I just want to present anything interesting. As weird, I like the weirder the better.
Yeah.
And over time you build quite a different lens or narrative to what we've been told or understood. And it's very movie. It's like a sci-fi. And I think the closest representation, and I bring it up quite often, is Avatar.
Yeah.
And I think the Avatar does such a fantastic job of showing these two different levels of humanity. And that, what about that guy, the main character in Avatar in the wheelchair, is that he steps in their shoes and sees the humanity, right? It's like the idea of the war we had with the Native Americans, whatever that was. And their the kind of war against paganism, not just here in America, but worldwide, right?
Yeah.
Is that we look at these pagans and their kind of nature worship as a lesser, more archaic version of truth. And for me, I'm speaking for myself here specifically, as I get older and I have children and I kind of have that kind of representation and see little bits of me and my own children and watch them grow and struggle and question reality like me and you did. It's, I think I long more for that. And when we met, I was living on land and I was growing most of my food and I was raising animals, and I've moved into the suburbs and don't have that life anymore. And, it's quite a juxtaposition, but I long to be on land and listen to a creek flow and watch animals. I think there's a lot to learn from just watching animals, how they interact with everything from a ball to a puddle of water. And but yeah, I'm getting off subject there, but
no, it is interesting this how we have this feedback loop and people growing grass, in America, and
it's a good one.
Looking at America like this. Here's a public lands of the United States map of 1890, kind of showing you like how much of America was just like public lands and available. Like huge amounts of California was available.
Wow.
Huge amounts of the Midwest was available, and just you could basically pick up this area. And so from what you're talking about, like petrified forests and kind of what people don't understand is how wild it was west of the Mississippi. It was just completely wild, and the kinds of things that we now look at and say, hey, these are places that are just empty prairies or plains, or they're filled with strip malls or suburbs, or like a lot of this is still kind of empty. But what was it like before? And what was it like before it was empty? And we start to find records of it being filled with lots of things, and not necessarily just Atlantis or Eden, but a bit of both. Like some architecture, some star forts, and a lot of trees, a lot of nature, a lot of environmental extinction events that we don't talk about now. Crazy species that were huge that are gone, and we just kind of pretend it all happened so long ago that it was, we forget.
Yeah, that again, the trouble with the whole, Miocene, Pleistocene, these hundreds of thousands of year epochs to or more millions, and that I don't agree with that at all. In fact, I just posted a video, I think within the last week, about the title is "The Chinese Were the oldest race on the continent," and it really isn't so much about who was the first or anything like that. It was just merely showing that the author, this is a early 1900s newspaper,
Yeah.
where the cutaway, maybe you saw it, where the cutaway he's showing, like, look, it's a city, and then it's wiped clean, and then they build another city, and then it's wiped clean, and then there's another, and he does it 4 times.
Yeah.
And
I don't know
yeah,
how far
so I
back
mean,
to
in
go.
the 1900s, they're going, holy smokes, like, we're talking about the Mayans and what happened to them. But so there's the thumbnail, and that's the actual, go up a little bit. No. Go
This
back.
one here?
Go up or down, sorry. Right there. Click on that thumbnail. The white part is the actual article. So if you look over there on the far right, he's showing the man digging a well, and he's going down through 4 buried civilizations. And the article goes on to describe exactly what I've been saying, is that we're not dealing with, there's so much writing about the Mayans, what cataclysm took out the Mayan culture. Well, this guy's saying, well, the Mayans, what about this culture? And what about this one? He's like, I found 4 cultures buried one after the other.
Wow.
And that's kind of the theme that I've been going with. Like, yeah, we should still definitely be asking about what happened. But to me, it's just like, that's a question that you may never find the answer to, because there's another one below that. And just to go full circle, we started talking about Constantinople, and one of my articles talks about Constantinople, and it's on my Twitter. They were trying to clean out a cistern under Constantinople, and I know, Andreas, you've seen those pictures. The cisterns there under Constantinople, they're humongous and they're crazy. Think of like people in the 1800s trying to tell you about Constantinople, and that these cisterns that are absolutely massive, how they make absolutely no sense. The city of Constantinople, there it is, built the top. Go up one more. Right there. Nope, that one. Yeah. Constantinople is notoriously a city built on ruins. Every time a new house is erected, numbers of ancient relics are brought to view. The trustees of the American Bible House in that city are making an addition to their fine building and have found a regular maze of ancient foundations at from 10 to 25 feet below the surface of the ground. Some of the old walls contain great bricks 14 inches square, as hard as stone, each stamped with a name in Greek characters. Now, like, I've said this a million times. I mean, you've talked about this before, but the Mayan alphabet is 50% Greek. And the authors in the 1800s were saying, well, what came first? The Greek alphabet or the Mayan alphabet? Did the Greeks come and people the Yucatan? Or did the people from the Yucatan come and people the Mediterranean? And part of the series I've been doing, at least I'd say 80% of my last 10 videos are talking about.
It seems like the script structure is secondary to like a Hellenistic phoneme system that they're using. Like there's a speaking that's going on that has some Hellenistic roots, and then like a script that kind of develops. So this could be easily construed as a merger of cultures if some culture is coming from the east to the west, and there's already a culture in the west.
Aztec Etruscan interbreeding thing.
Exactly.
In that time frame, they didn't say it like that. And this is like the combination between a Phoenician or phonetic and a hieroglyphic or pictographic language. That there isn't some horrible amount of hoops to jump through to do it. It just is, right?
Yeah.
That these Mayans would look at a phonetic collection of letters and they'd go, yeah, that is this. You know what I mean?
And it's kind of like Bach Saga, because if not everyone can read the thing, you can still look at it and kind of pick up the definitions and meaning. So it's designed for an audience that's illiterate.
Yeah.
As well as a very literate audience.
Exactly. And this is kind of like the sea trader narrative that exists that's pretty powerful, that the Phoenicians Phoenicians. Who are the Phoenicians? I mean, this is like that going back to what we were saying about
people,
warriors,
rabbis,
Scythians. Yeah,
literate,
it's everything.
the literates.
Exactly.
The literates.
Yeah, it's the priests.
Yeah.
Because, do you know the Oddfellows?
I got Society?
The Oddfellows.
Yeah, for sure.
I got my hands on a newspaper article. I've never published it or put it out in the public, but I've talked about it before. I got a speech by one of this gentleman of the Oddfellows, and it was him telling about the history of the Phoenicians. And he says the Phoenicians weren't a race. They were a group of people in a secret society that reached a certain level, like masonry is basically what he's describing. And that when they got to the highest level, which was called Q was the highest level. That was their 33rd degree. It was called the eye of the needle. That when they reached that, they were then taught about magnetism. So the secrets of magnetism are what they were keeping from the lower levels. And that all captains, anyone that had a ship and was taught navigation, how to use a compass, how to look at the stars, so astrology, navigation, magnetism, this is all the magi. It's all wrapped up in the same thing as what he's saying. He's saying the Brahmins, the magi, the priests, the Egyptians, the pharaohs, they were all Phoenicians. They could speak this language. It was translated to all these different regions so the craft, the quote craft, could be taught. And all these priests had, druids. It's all the same thing. Anyways, long story short, the seafarers had the language, they had the astronomy, they had the magnetism, right? And that religion kind of became an offshoot of this. And that this is kind of what masonry today guards. And anyways, so the Oddfellow is speaking to his, collection of men, and he's explaining this, and he's saying exactly what you're saying. He's like, the Phoenicians weren't white, they weren't black, they were literate people who were captains of ships, which was the highest thing you could have below a king, was to be a captain. And you had all the men below you. You were basically a representation of that king or whoever you were speaking for him. And you were a priest too. It's like the Quetzalcoatl idea, right? And that people, when they describe, Mormons especially, but there's many other cultures, that when they describe this Quetzalcoatl person, right? But there's so many representations of him that match perfectly Jesus. There's Vishnu. Is it Vishnu?
Yeah.
That they all say the same thing. They came in, they taught the language,
Vishnu.
They taught the study of the stars. They don't always touch on magnetism. But anyways, and I think that's kind of the secret. And when you look at the Etruscans, and since we were talking about the Phoenicians and language and all of these things, all letters for me are stars. The letters are all just kind of like the idea of the hunter and how we anthropomorphize things we see in nature, that the stars would be no different, and that the constellations became symbolic and became letters. And when we're talking about teaching language, we're really teaching. Yeah, that's
This picture makes so many people upset because he's not flying and shooting fire out of his mouth as it should be. But
these paintings are all over the Mormon Church, and
dude, I'm working on making some of my own.
They do trigger people, and it's unfortunate. Again, everyone is going to take these myths and make their story to be the true story and your story to be the false story, or that Satan has manipulated your mind and that you're hearing all these false narratives and blah 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 blah. And that's fine. Everyone's entitled to feel and think whatever they want to. But before I get too far off subject, the Phoenician thing in this Oddfellows speech, it was amazing. It's I'll have to share it with you. Maybe another time when we do this, I'll read some of it. But yeah, the highest order a Phoenician could reach was Q, which is funny because
here's my new Mormon artwork, by the way. I was just working on this. Yeah, there we go.
Is that really yours?
Well, with some AI's help, of course.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that would piss off a lot more people.
Yeah. Dragon Ball Jesus is pretty cool, though. I just feel like we need more of that. Keep going. Sorry.
But anyways, I don't even know how we got there, but But yeah, just these ideas of culture and language and myth and Eden, right? Because that's what we're
Yeah.
tying it back to, and that's kind of the
Indo-Aryan
title of
Eden
this
too, because
talk.
like the fact that we call buffalo when they're bison, you know what I mean? Like people associate it with the India buffalo. There's always been this idea that this is India, and this idea of like God's chosen people, the Indios, like people in God, Dios, you know.
Yeah.
So that there was some sort of a closer thing to nature here. And you look at, I was at Croatia this summer. I saw how the coast is just stone because at one point it was beautiful trees that were cut down to make boats for the Romans or whomever, right? So you have a lot of these examples of really, really quick feedback loops of change. And so all the stuff is just so pressing and so immediate and so recent. It's not like so long ago.
But the generation that we deal with day to day is no wiser to it.
Yeah.
But like you said, it is quick, but it's not quick. When you're talking, it's hard for anybody
We
nowadays.
forget quicker.
Yeah, who thinks about generations. Like when I look at I have 3 boys, and when I look at them, I see like little pieces of myself in every one of them, and that like is that Vanderbilt, what's the word set? Where you can just zoom out and you'll see every piece, or you'll zoom in and it'll just continue and continue. It's like
Mandelbrot, yeah.
Mandelbrot, sorry. I think of that when I look at my kids, and I think, how many versions of me came before for me to be existing right now?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
How far do you have to go back before we're talking about thousands of people? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Yesterday I was talking to my friend Andrew Vega, and he was definitely not thinking he was ever going to have kids. And he was dating some girl who had a kid, and now he's got like a wife and several kids, and his life is amazing. And he's like, and it's just crazy because those people are going to have kids. And like the similar thing happened to him. It's like the amazingness of how, and yeah, you see this a lot where someone all of a sudden has 100 grandkids that wouldn't have existed if they didn't get a family. So
yeah, and all the things that had to happen, right?
Yeah.
Because all my immediate family members were in war. My father was in the military during Vietnam. His grandfather, my mom's father, both World War II pilots. Like, you look at all the ways things could have gone south, and I wouldn't be here, and my kids wouldn't be here, and all the lives that are going to come down the line from that. It's just, it's mind bending to me. And it's like, it's really easy for me to get caught up in my day to day. Right. And since we kind of were talking about that with the Eden narrative, and that it's easy to focus on your little bubble. And I think the easiest way to kind of relieve some of that stress that we were mentioning, like, just the wear and tear of being a human, is just to think like that may not make people feel better. Like, there's thousands that came before you for one period for you right now. And like, for me, that's like a mind fuck consciously, and, but yeah,
we also had, go ahead.
No, having kids and whatever, you don't need to do any of that to experience that feeling. And I'm certainly not trying to say that, but I have those epiphanies all the time looking at them. You see it's like watching a movie of you almost, or like an AI version. I don't want to use that term, but they have your mannerisms and these downloads. And, you mentioned DNA, and we never really got into that, but it's really quite beautiful. And I think ultimately the point I'm trying to make when we talk about Eden is that it's a kind of a conscious thing for me, or subconscious. It's both, but
is there a return to Eden? Like, is heaven Eden? Are we trying to get back to Eden? Like, is that still the thing?
I think, like we were saying, the idea of man and woman is the splitting of Eden, and that they're pieces, just like your brain. The two hemispheres of your brain are magnetically opposed to one another. And this is proven scientifically, metaphysically. There's so many things that point to this, that there is a positive and negative sway to emotion, right? Like, anger and love and all these things. There is a measurable magnetic representation of these things. And that, returning to Eden for me, like we mentioned, reading that tiny little excerpt about Janus and the monad, because Janus is the monad. You know, that symbol that exists in every culture, circle with a dot in the middle. That is Eden. And I do believe that in mentioning my near-death experience that I had, that's what it was for me. I left my physical body. I had a motorcycle accident. For listeners out there that haven't heard me tell the story, I won't go too deep into it. I had a motorcycle accident and was nearly paralyzed, pretty serious, and left my body and saw the whole thing, watched it all happen from outside of my body. And there was like no emotions anymore. That's the only way to really describe the feeling. Was there was no, I didn't feel a particular way about anything. I wasn't like analyzing every moment and having all these running thoughts. It was just like peace. And that sent me on a journey into studying more people that had near death experiences and what they took away from it. And that led me to a book called Proof of Heaven. I strongly recommend that for anybody who's struggling with these ideas about what is death, what is life. It's a brain surgeon gets this deadly brain infection and dies many times and has all these insane hallucinations. And his colleagues tell him that that's what happens. You were sick. You're just seeing things. And he decided to dedicate the rest of his working life to proving that what he was experiencing wasn't hallucinations, that it was real, or at least, abject reality, right? And yeah, that book is incredible. And so, yeah, long story, long answer. I definitely believe that returning to Eden, as kind of similar to the idea that Buddha described, is just you entering Eden, you opening the door and stepping into a different space. And that Adam and Eve being removed from the garden was not only a conscious symbology, but a literal physical one. And that you could think of it as being birthed from the womb. And we talked about this symbolism a little bit when we did our baby farms video, and the idea of, humans being little crops, and it kind of like the Matrix symbolism again, where the robots harvesting all the human batteries. And there are definitely dark paths you could go down when you start to look at the world like that, but I tend to side more with the positive ones. Long answer, sorry.
No, it's cool. I mean, it's interesting because, yeah, like the idea of whether we're supposed to be reincarnated, whether we're supposed to escape to a new world or anything. It's like, it is interesting because we do have this potential, and like it's an interesting narrative that is from our more primordial part of humanity to return to perfect nature, where nature is harmonious and blissful and perfect. And it's interesting because nature isn't that way, but that might be because of us. It's hard to know what nature is really like. It's hard to know what everything is like in a perfect system. There could be a system that has naturally the right exhales and inhales to deal with, earthquakes in a comfortable way, releases of volcanoes in a comfortable way, life that sustains itself in a comfortable way. There's no reason it has to be all this suffering.
Order out of chaos.
Yeah, so I wonder, like, how much of it is man-made? The more you look at it, like, we don't have.
It's when you give up.
Yeah,
even the Native Americans, and I hate using that term, but many of the Aboriginal cultures of the United States said that the problem is we're fighting everything all the time. They always used the water symbolism when they described living.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, you're a little thing in this huge story, and it's flowing one way. And he's like, they'd always say that, like, you Americans are always trying to paddle upstream. He's like, you're going to run out of energy eventually, or you're going to die early. It's like, we're just cruising down the river.
Yeah.
We're living life one day at a time. They were all about living in the moment. Of course, they understood astrology, and they held all those things to be very sacred. This is kind of what we talked about with the transition period, with the reset ideology, and then the destruction of, quote, paganism, right? Nature worship is demonized around the same time frame we're asking questions of what's going on here, America, but worldwide, from the late 1700s to the mid 1800s.
Right.
And the Bolsheviks, we could go on and on, right? The destruction of certain cultures, language is being reduced, right? There are many markers of this, and quote paganism or the country folk, right? Because pagan really just is a descriptor of somebody that lives outside the city.
Yeah, somebody who's not part of the army, the Corpus Christi, right? If you're not part of the military, that's,
You're not part of the machine. And we talked about this, I think, a little bit when we talked about the egregore and the idea of the Leviathan. There's a book written called The Leviathan, and I'm spacing the name of the author. But basically he says that when you... There we go. That's right there. Look at that picture. Hobbes, thank you.
Yeah.
His writing is insane and very telling. I reference it quite often.
We live in a Hobbesian world for sure.
Look at the symbology here, right? He has star forts in his book cover, and he's quite blatant with his description, saying that the idea of forcing people into these really tight groupings, city-states, that group thought, that consciousness is entrainment. Human consciousness naturally will entrain. It's like a woman's cycle, right? Their menstruation will sync with other women, and you can get a whole culture, a whole village where their menstruations are synced, almost like literally within an hour or so of each other. The same thing goes for thought. And that if you want to get an army behind a king, you got to get them all living tight. You're not going to be collecting knights on their own land, raising their own animals, seeing the beauty in nature, raising their children on their land. You know what I mean? Why would they want to leave that? Hobbes is blatant, and I think he was way ahead of his time, and it's showing you almost to a T what's going on today in culture. That culture and people are manipulated in masses by shoving them all into tight city spaces together.
Right.
And that's the destruction of the pagan world and why the, quote, Native American had to go. Right?
Yeah. The native, just the idea of being a native human had to go, I think is really...
absolutely. That's why they're all immigrants.
Mm-hmm. We're all immigrants.
And when you read Bacon's New Utopia, I know I'm throwing a lot of books out there, but I know you're familiar with these Xirtus, so hopefully people can just play catch up. Me and you have talked about this many, many times.
Yeah.
But when you read this book and you really, really read it, you're like, oh, this is creepy. It's like it's like a weird representation of like Ready Player One.
It's kind of like Kevin Smith's version of like that weird Christian cult horror movie. It's like this is a world where they just like the Bible washed up on shore and they live by it. And you're like, oh, it better be the right book to live by. Imagine if it was the Gita or if the Quran if it was Spider-Man. No, it was the Bible. Okay, interesting book.
Yeah, and I just think there's so much to throw around between those three there. But yeah, group thought and being mindful, right? Even Buddha said you can't meditate all day. We're here to live. You got to live.
Yeah.
And that it's okay to be human. And, he'd poke fun at, what would he say? He made jokes about, like, I can't remember his verbiage, but the goody two-shoes in any, quote, religion is always hated. And they're actually doing more harm to the movement than good, because you're basically
you see the Buddha on his road.
Yeah, you're demonizing what it is to be human. And to give yourself grace.
Being human is weird, you're right, because it's the idea of being a god restrained to flesh of beast, like you said kind of at the beginning of the thing. And so it's a weird parallel, because you're constantly wrestling with, those natures, but that kind of proves that nature exists. That's the thing. A lot of people say, well, then we should just be beasts.
Yeah.
Except the fact that there's an inherent idea that you're trying to prove justice, truth, love, and all these things. It says that there's divine principles. It kind of it proves that exists.
It's like what you stated about that zero isn't an amoeba. It's Adam and Eve in a garden with a set of rules.
It's a world,
a spoken word, and then it sets out from there. That there's already kind of not a ground rules, but there's already the foundation of reality established.
Yeah.
Right? And what goes into all of that. Well said. And but yeah, I think I'm about out of time for today.
Yeah, we did a 2-hour thing. I was going to tell people, make sure that they can find your work. And what are you working on next? I mean, everybody, he just did the Eden video, so we talked a bit about it, but you should actually go ahead and just watch his Eden in America video that came out 4 days ago, amongst all the others, because just every video's just got such great work gone into it. So
you're too kind. Yeah, so I talk about radium a lot. I think there's a lot of overlap in our listeners, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
But for your listeners that, one of my first videos ever was with Xirtus. You can find it on his channel. We talk about baby farms.
Yeah.
That video is over 4 years old now. But what do I have going on right now? It's mostly Anomalous America.
Yeah.
I love that series.
He's been doing state after state, telling you everything you didn't know about each state, and he's talking to people from the states too. So like when he talked to Dr. Longo about Florida and everything, like, so he's doing a lot of research into the state, and so pick your own.
And then
state.
my focus is on a lot of like out of the Yucatan.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what I was doing was with Dr. Longo and Old World Florida when it comes to that stuff, respectively.
Yeah.
That the Gulf of Mexico is the true Fertile Crescent. Also tying a lot of the quote biblical stories. The idea of them being in Palestine and in the Middle East. That many of them actually were taking place here in the Americas. And all kinds of stuff. I mean, as you can see right here, you're scanning through some of these. I talk about caves. I talk about the origins of CERN. That's an article from the 1920s where they're talking about the first mini hadron collider that they built.
Wow.
There's Egyptian temple found in Rock Island. Yeah, the origins of CERN. I have a whole radium playlist. I think there's probably 8 episodes now.
Oh yeah.
Where I talk about
playlists are good.
The origins of CERN, and this ties in with you nicely, and it will be a perfect wrap up. Do you remember your NIMSA video?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
From a long time ago, like 6 years ago, your NIMSA video?
Yeah.
One of my favorites.
Thank you.
My first ever radium episode, I talk about the first time radium was ever written of in public in newspapers. They're describing a anti-gravitic ship. They're describing a ship, and it's in Southern California. It's with a Indian man. That's how they describe him, a dark-skinned Indian, like not Native American, but Indian.
Yeah.
And he's developed an anti-gravity ship that uses radium and batteries to create alternating magnetic currents that allow him to move an entire ship up and down with one finger. And it can go straight, horizontal, up and down. And yeah, so then I go all over the place with anti-gravitics. I talk about NIMSA. I talk about all the crazy flying craft they were seeing in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
They've decided to put some of this in the Museum of Science in Minnesota, and you can see like they talk about some of the same things. You just have to, if you want to find the radium section, you just have to go to the quackery section, right?
Is that what it is?
Yep, they have a quackery section because it's like financed, of course, by the pharmaceutical companies and General Electric and everything else like that.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So, but you can go in there and they have a Geiger counter. They have a Reich orgone chamber. They have
quackery. Wow.
They have quackery everywhere. And then here's your.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, yeah.
The radium. They have little bottles of. You can see it's kind of blurry, but there they are. The radium bottles right there, and radium
tablets,
rocks,
radium drops.
Everything to make your radium water. Yeah.
Yeah. So. I talk about how every natural, so like the first time vacation was used as like a destination vacation was the wealthy would go to hot springs, and that the first resorts, quote resorts of America, were on hot springs,
mineral baths and nuclear waters.
The wealthy, and this is where Turkish bath and Roman baths. This is where it all comes from. They were using steam from underground chambers, and this is the same here in America. And me and Longo have done a bunch of, Old World Florida have done a bunch of videos on this. But they were basically saying that the spring water in Texas, Arizona, Georgia, Florida is highly impregnated with radium.
Right.
And that this radium water, whether you ingest it in steam, right? The sauna, the origin of the Finnish sauna, the Native Americans and the Inuits had these same saunas. Their saunas are all over the place, whether you call them a Turkish bath or a Roman bath.
Oh, have you ever been to Geronimo's? I went to Geronimo's hot springs in Truth or Consequences hot springs, which is...
No. I've been to Radium Springs in Georgia. It's near my family.
This is the one that Geronimo used to go in before battles, and there's all kinds of things. There's hot mud bogs, there's arsenic baths, there's radium baths, there's energy. It's super gnarly, and of course that would be where Geronimo goes and swims.
I never heard of that. That's really amazing. Yeah,
we'll go someday.
Rockefellers. So many of the Astor family, on and on and on. All the wealthy people were going to these quote destination places.
Destination vacation mineral baths.
They were in Pasadena. They were in Arizona. They were in a few in Texas, a few in Colorado.
In like 1919,
in
1919, you've got the influenza and tuberculosis, and all of a sudden, Idaho hot springs and all the Great Basin hot springs start to emerge also. And so people, you can actually still find them, these like 20th century buildings that have each room has its own bath and everything set up. And yeah, like the only problem is people are now starting to become, because in the 60s and the 70s, they start creating fears of radiation, right?
Oh,
so
yeah. I mean, it was well known that anyone with any kind of chest mucus, they would just call it buildup of mucus. Anytime your body's retaining mucus, you want to fight that. The mucus is their first sign that your body has a bug, right? And they would immediately hit the sauna.
Yeah.
A steam room, a bath, a Turkish bath. That's what you do. That was always the treatment for any kind of a sinus infection or whatever, was this. And you find radium found not only in not high quantities, because again, it's about the medium and it's about the right dosage.
Right.
But yeah, the spring water, Ponce de Leon, right? Looking for the fountain of youth.
Of course.
He's looking for these ancient healing springs that are found from Cuba all the way into West Virginia, the Carolinas.
Yeah.
All over that region, Arkansas, on and on and on. So yeah, I've covered a lot of different material, all kinds of stuff: giants, trees, caves, giant people, giant animals. I think I got a pretty interesting set of
to be fair,
variety. So whatever trips your trigger, jump in there. And
make sure you guys sign up also on the Twitter. Subscribe on YouTube, but also he's got a great Twitter, and like pretty much every day he's posting newspaper articles from...
People hate Twitter, and I'll be honest, like I like Instagram more, but because I have so much material on Twitter, I can't just walk away from it.
I no longer hate Twitter. I think I'm okay with X. I'm just going to say. Also, if you use X, click on the Pro button if you have Pro Twitter, because check this out. Look at this. Boom. It just does this crazy thing where it gives you all of your notifications at once. Yeah. So the new Pro Twitter is way cooler. And with Grok, now that you can use AI and stuff, I'd say give it a shot. But yeah, everybody make sure you subscribe to Ben, the Archivist Analog, and like go to his Twitter as well as his YouTube. And you can find him on Instagram. But, you know, from YouTube particularly, he's putting out
and
all
I
his
do
material.
a thread on Twitter for every one of my Anomalous America episodes. So any of the material, not any, but a lot of the material, if you'll scroll down a little bit to my Anomalous post, right, keep going, right there, click on that. It's a thread.
Yeah.
So I do these threads for each episode. So whatever state you've missed, you can just go search Anomalous America, Oregon, Alaska, whatever, and you're going to see a bunch of old artwork, old photographs, old maps, and then a bunch of clippings. So it's a quick little synopsis. You don't have to watch a 2-hour video, but if it's enough to intrigue you to watch a video, I strongly suggest it, because I read a lot more material in the videos than I cover here on Twitter. But you can see there's quite a lot, and each one of these is really interesting. So yeah, I think that's a good summary. I'd love to do this again, and we can...
Let's definitely do this again. Let's do a video soon.
Maybe we'll do, like, talk about some more radium stuff. I think we
Yeah,
there's
and
a lot of overlaps. With
we should do another video together, and we should also do another video with Dr. Longo, because we did that one that was really great too.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then radium, and then more about the future, because out of Eden, the next thing is like, where do we go from there, and like the fall of man and William Blake and everything.
Get deep into the Musk material.
Yeah. All right, everybody. See you guys later. Thanks a lot. Good to see you.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
This next story has been suppressed by mainstream media. Let's go to Andreas for more.
Everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hello. Welcome to the Xirtus. Tune in for another exciting episode of wonder, imagination, and discovery.
Recent Tartarians.
Она образует всеобщие закономерности, определяющие законы классической физики для нашего
Sometimes I
мира.
look at the moon and just think, your skin's beautiful. Baby, when I met you, there was peace unknown.
Что касается энергии наномер, то она превышает ядерную в немыслимое число раз. 10 в 74 степени.
That's it. That's it. That's it. With your arms now. That's it. That's it.
Thank you for watching Xirtus. Keep listening. Remember, if you enjoyed the video, please follow and subscribe and share and support. It really helps. Coming up next, Xirtus.
By the way, that's gone. If you didn't record that, that's gone forever. It's gone.